Gerson, and I'm with Travelex International, and I have Peter Askin with me, who's going to give us a wonderful presentation of Australia. It's the first part of a three-part series for Australia because there's too much to cover in one webinar. But Peter is my exclusive partner for Australia and New Zealand. He's a wonderful partner, and he does great itineraries for us, and he's going to take you through a couple of them today. So Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. And for any of you that were on the hopeful broadcast last night that ended up with many failures because of my internet, I do apologize. So we'll try and make this one a little bit more efficient. So my company is Southern World. We're a ground operator based in Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. And we look after all of Lisa's clients, indeed all of the company's clients in Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. So last month I did a presentation on New Zealand. So I'm going to start a number of presentations on Australia. So to begin with, I'll just talk a little bit about Australia as a destination, and then go over a couple of different itineraries possibilities. So there's a marketing campaign called There's Nothing Like Australia, and we're going to follow through on some of their marketing initiatives and to get you enthused about the destination. And I guess to start with, we can talk about the reason to go to Australia. The time is now. I've lived in the US now for over 30 years, and I think the flights to Australia are cheaper now than when I first arrived here in 1987. That's mainly due to the fact that there are a lot more airlines flying to our part of the world now. And that's given a huge competitive nature to the fares. And of course, Americans are traveling much more, and they look to Australia and New Zealand as a great destination for them. The exchange rate works well in your favor. It only costs about 68, 69 cents to buy an Australian dollar. And interestingly enough, the last one is global conditions favor Australia. So I'll be touching on the wildfires as that pertains to that in a few more slides. So there's nothing like Australia for wildlife, food and drink, natural beauty and culture. And there you see it all in front of you. The wildlife is abundant. There are many of the world's weirdest species of wildlife in Australia, from marsupials to mammals. It's just an amazing abundance of different types of wildlife, renowned for its food and wine, and to be able to dine in wonderful locations like there at Uluru. The natural beauty of the place is unrenowned. Well renowned, I should say. There's the foreshore of the beaches and the Whitsunday Islands. And then, of course, last but not least, is the amazing Aboriginal culture, the oldest living culture in the world. So if we talk about Australia as far as size, you can see there that it is basically the same size as the United States. So when you think of that and you think about where you want to go and see and do in Australia, you really need to be directed by somebody like Lisa, who's going to give you the idea that you just can't do it all. You can't do Europe on a 2, 3, 4, even 4-week vacation. And certainly you can't do Australia. You do it in bite-sized pieces. So I talked about the wildfires just a little bit earlier, and that will give you an idea of the scope of the size of Australia and where exactly the wildfires have been. And if you notice there, the little orange triangles are where there is some source of fire, and the red dot is really the only one that's of major concern at the moment. We just put out a news brief overnight to all our clients, and I thought I'd just give you a quick little update. It's great to advise that the recovery process is now in full swing. Both Sydney, Melbourne, and the surrounding regions have had good rainfall and milder temperatures over the past week, and this has really helped with the controlling and extinguishing of bushfires in both regions. There has been concern the air quality of the Australian Open in Melbourne could cause delay in plays, but the only delays this week have been because of heavy rain. No one is complaining. I don't know whether any of you have had a chance to watch the Australian Open. I watched some of the matches last night, and obviously the weather is fine and clear down there. It's also important to correct the perceptions created by international media and social media posts, which have indicated that the whole of Australia has been on fire. Only 3 to 4% of the country has been directed impact by the bushfires. So I think that sort of brings it in perspective. Australia is a very large country. When we touch on the Blue Mountains, which you can just see beyond the west of Sydney, I'll talk a little bit about the fact that this is a phenomena that happens every year, and it's happened basically since the beginning of the time because of the eucalypt trees. So anyway, enough of that. We've seen some devastating footage on the TV, but and some real tragic situations with both human and animal life. But Australia is certainly on the road to recovery. So when's the best time to travel to Australia? It really is a year-round destination, not dissimilar to this country. Obviously, there are times of the year where Florida or Arizona is not the optimum time. Maybe some Kiwis and Aussies think it's not the right time to be here in Chicago in the middle of winter. So similarly in Australia, we have parts of Australia, like the very top end, that's very, very humid and rainy in the summer season. So you would not go to Darwin at this time of year. It's kind of more like the Okavanga Delta and flooding. So, but you can see from the map there that it is a great climate, and all of Australia, apart from the top end, is accessible year round. We talked about the number of flights and the options that you've got from the North American market. And there you can see a plethora of different flights and opportunities and routings. Not next month, but March, we will now have a flight from Chicago to Brisbane direct on Qantas, which will be welcome in this city. If you were on my presentation on New Zealand last month, we talked about the Chicago-Auckland flight, and of course you can connect via Auckland, so direct Chicago, Auckland, Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne, if that was a routing you wanted to take as well. So plenty of flight opportunities to head down to Australia. I mentioned earlier about the itineraries I was going to talk about, and both of them are under 2 weeks. So that sort of just talks about the two-week walkabout. Generally, Aussies and Kiwis think of Americans as time poor on their vacations. Europeans will come for 4 to 5 weeks, but Americans basically generally anywhere from sort of 10 days to maybe 3 weeks. So that's why we started up with some of these shorter itineraries as an entree into visiting Australia. So in a 2 to 3 week walkabout, you can see 2 to 3 destinations and an easy 2 week itinerary. Indeed, it's closer than you certainly would believe, especially with the direct flights now, and definitely a much higher standard of airline product, especially on flights, in-flight services. And of course, I mentioned the exchange rate, the airfares. It's great value for money to travel down to Australia. So Tourism Australia, about 6 months ago, launched this new marketing campaign called Philosophy. They did halt it a little bit because of the fires, but they're going to be back up and running this campaign again. So I'm going to give a little talk about that, and then at the very end of the presentation show you a video. So what are the philosophies? This is very Aussie. No worries attitude, it's pretty self-explanatory. Mateship and the Australian flavour. Definitely very, very Aussie. A stranger is a mate you haven't met yet. I actually love that expression, even though I'm a New Zealander. We have a similar philosophy in a Kiwi style in New Zealand. Love of nature, now that's easily shown. Boundless optimism. Surely every Aussie you've met has got a positive outlook on life. Sense of adventure. That's everything about Aussies. Generosity of spirit. They really want to show you their country, show you their balanced lifestyle. They don't take too many things too seriously. I think the coolest thing is storytelling. And this may have a little bit of an Aboriginal bent because they have no written language. So everything is brought down from generation to generation by storytelling. But that's also a general Aussie thing as well. So storytelling is a big thing about not only selling Australia, but when you go and visit, coming back and telling your friends exactly what an amazing destination it was. So there you go. I skipped over that. I really think that's a great statement. A stranger is a mate you haven't met yet. So the two three-city itineraries that I was going to look at, and you can combine them. You could do Melbourne and make it a 4-city one. Is what we call Sydney, Rock and Reef. It's a 3-night Sydney, 2 nights at Uluru, at Ayers Rock, and then up to Cairns for a further 3 nights. Currently, to get back to the States, you'd probably need at least 1 or 2 nights in another city. That could be Brisbane, because you can't connect direct from Cairns back to the USA. And the other itinerary works perfectly. You could fly from Chicago via LA or San Francisco to Melbourne, up to Cairns, down to Sydney, and fly back to the US from Sydney. So that's a 3-night stay in each location. I was just going to take you through those 4 different stops and sort of show you a few pictures and explain what you do in those 4 destinations. Sydney sort of speaks for itself. Iconic Opera House and Harbour Bridge, that we like to call the coat hanger. Great way to be introduced into Australia on the first day or second day of arrival is to do a walking tour of the rocks with an Aboriginal guide and have a very traditional welcome to country. Even though some of you as clients might be cruising to and from Australia, there's no better way to see the harbour in a smallish motorboat or a yacht to see the magnificent Sydney from the waterside, not just doing a land tour. Beautiful shot of the Opera House there, and of course the bridge climb is now a synonymous part of any itinerary involving Sydney. You can do that morning, afternoon, at dusk, and even into the evening hours for a different view of Sydney. And there we have the famous fireworks that many people clamour to go to Sydney over New Year's. Famous for its surfing on Bondi Beach. There's a great operator we use there that does surf lessons for young and old. So that's a nice little day excursion out to Bondi, great restaurants and bars as well. And then, of course, we head out to the Blue Mountains to catch some of the wildlife. I mentioned before, the koalas in the eucalypt trees. This is something I basically briefly talked about before, where these trees will ignite naturally from lightning strikes or whatever in the summer. There'll be a little bit of a burn off and they regenerate very, very quickly. I saw some shots the other day of trees and burnt out areas that within days have started to regenerate. I know we certainly lost a lot of wildlife, but believe me, there is still plenty of wildlife available to see in Australia. So this is the Blue Mountains region, just about an hour and a half west of Sydney. Stunning scenery. And if you head a little bit further west, about another hour and a half west, you come to another area called Wogan Valley, which has one of our luxury properties. This indeed was closed down during the fire, not because it was in any imminent danger, but they did have some smoke issues out there, and it reopens on the 1st of February unspoiled. Any of the scarring that had taken place is already regenerated. I saw some photos of everywhere being sort of green and lush again. So that's a spectacular one and only property about 3 hours west of Sydney. Heading down to Melbourne, I like to say that Melbourne's the equivalent of New York as San Francisco is to Sydney. Both of them amazing art towns, theatre, music. They both have amazing art centres. Of course, the Sydney has the Opera House. Melbourne has more of a restaurant, foodie side of it. Although Sydney's full of wonderful restaurants, it's definitely more of sort of a coffee culture and high-end restaurants in Melbourne. It's a tram city, easy to get around. But what I really like the most about Melbourne, it's a lanes and arcade city. So that's a great way to sort of get yourself acquainted with the city, do a walking tour of all the lanes and arcades. And then, of course, in the evening, you can do a walking degustation dinner where you stop off at various different restaurants to do wine pairings and different assorted plates of food. As you're well aware, the Australian Open is going on right now. Melbourne is a sports nut city. It has the Australian Open, it has the Australian Grand Prix, it has this crazy game called Australian Rules Football, yeah, for any major sporting event, Melbourne is a wonderful place to go and see it live. Has two wonderful wine growing areas, the Mornington Peninsula and the Yarra Valley. And of course, the Great Ocean Road is a stunning drive, driving down the southern coast south of Melbourne. Next stop would be Uluru, which is the Aboriginal name for Ayers Rock. This amazing monolith that changes color depending on whether it's morning or night, dusk or sunrise. So we do a morning tour where you see the sunrise over Uluru. We also do an afternoon tour of Kata, which is another amazing rock formation. You can see Ayers Rock there in the background as a comparison. All sorts of interesting things to do out there. You can take a camel to dinner. You can watch this amazing light installation. I should have had a shot with Uluru in the background, makes it even more impressive. But this is an amazing light installation over the size of about 3 football fields. and especially when you have the beautiful night skies in Uluru, it makes it even more special. And of course, dining under the stars. Understand that apart from those fluorescent lights there before, you have no unnatural light around, so the night sky is just amazing. So seeing the Southern Cross out of Uluru is quite impressive. From there, we head from the centre of Australia all the way to the far north Queensland, up in Cairns and the Port Douglas region, which is a phenomena of itself because it's where the rainforest meets the Great Barrier Reef. So two amazing UNESCO parks meet sort of side by side. Interestingly, there's only 2 states in Australia that you can actually hold a koala, and New South Wales is not one, nor is Victoria where Melbourne is, but Queensland is. So whilst you're in Cairns or Port Douglas, you can have an opportunity to get up and close to a koala. Obviously famous for its reef, thousands of miles of Great Barrier Reef. And it's still, the majority of the reef is still alive and well. There have been obviously some issues with a little bit of bleaching, but it's a very minor part of the reef. So there are many different ways of doing the reef. Going to a pontoon like this, where you have glass bottom boats and semi-submersibles, and you can snorkel or dive, or you can go out on a vessel that you dive or snorkel off the back of it. So there's different areas of the reef that operators go to, and many different types of experiences, big boats and small. Just beautiful views of what's available for you underwater as a snorkeler or a diver. It gives you another opportunity to experience Aboriginal culture. We have a tour with some Aboriginal guides where you go spear some fishing in the mangroves and learn about their culture, but also learn about the Daintree National Forest up there and go on a little bit of a walkabout for a day. I wanted to play a little video for you, which is the release of their new campaign.
What makes this country so special? Not only does it look good, it feels better.
You always know when you're in Australia, you sort of feel confident you can say good day to someone, say hello to someone, and they'll say it back.
I say good day, mate, to about 40 people a day.
We're a pretty cruisy bunch, I think, most of the time.
Being able to laugh at each other, laugh at ourselves. I think that gives us the ability to have a smile on our face most days.
Everyone is willing to talk to you, walk down the street, smile at you, say hello. G'day, mate!
Morning, how are you, brother? You treat people like family.
We love people coming to visit us so we can show them where we live and what we do.
So this literally is the backyard. And we'll not find any fresher than this, than right here. Not much point looking at them. We're going to eat them.
This is kangaroo daycare.
I don't know anywhere else in the world that has animals like we have.
Who are you, mate?
To be Australian, I think, is to have this amazing connection with our environment and to have this cool sense of adventure.
You know, take your shoes off. Feel that sand between your toes.
You always feel better once you've been in the salt water. You never regret a surf.
You know, why not be laid back? There's too much stress in the world, and if you let it get to you, sometimes you got to take a step back and just chill out a bit, mate. Take it easy. This is Rui and Larry and Zen. This is Ralph.
To be able to show people what we have here and guide them through that, it's so special.
They're like fluffy little boulders.
We don't want people just to come and see. We want people to come and feel. This is like a big supermarket. If you want to try it, have a taste.
It's our backyard. We want you to fall in love with it and enjoy it as much as we do.
This is my dream come true, and it's a pleasure to always talk to people and tell them, you know, a little bit of your story so that they take that story away with them.
You never know what you're going to get to see. It is always something different, and it's always those unexpected things that are the highlight of your day and just make your day.
We're in a very lucky country. We have everything that we could possibly need.
No traffic lights, nothing like that. No big high-rise building, fresh air. Untouched wilderness, pretty much. What you see and feel out there, you put inside there and you carry it with you.
So there we go. I actually think that's an extremely good video, and it sort of wraps up philosophy for all of us. It gives you a feeling of the Aussie spirit, the mateship, and shows you what Australia is all about. So I really appreciate you tuning in today. I appreciate the people that were on last night that missed the second half of this presentation. So hopefully you have an opportunity to have a look at this now and reflect on that. And if there's anything Lisa and I can do to assist you with your planning to Australia, please let us know.